I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when I looked out the window and saw construction equipment tearing up my front lawn at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in suburban Phoenix, Arizona. The sound of heavy machinery had woken me up 15 minutes earlier, and now I was watching in complete disbelief as a massive excavator carved a trench through the grass I had spent 2 years nurturing back to health in this desert climate. My name is Vincent Sawyer, and I had lived at 4782 Saguaro Ridge Drive for almost 3 years. The house was a modest single-story ranch-style home with a decent-sized lot, about half an acre, which was pretty good for the neighborhood. I had bought it after my divorce, needing a fresh start and a place that was entirely mine. The neighborhood was part of the Saguaro Ridge community, governed by an HOA that I had minimal interaction with up until that morning. I paid my dues on time, kept my lawn maintained, and generally stayed out of everyone's way. I rushed outside in my pajama pants and t-shirt, my bare feet hitting the still cool concrete of my driveway. The sun was just starting to climb over the mountains in the distance, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. A construction crew of about 5 men was working near the edge of my property, and beyond them, I could see the continuation of what looked like road work extending down the street. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted over the noise of the machinery. One of the workers, a younger guy in a hard hat and reflective vest, looked up and pointed toward a white pickup truck parked on the street. "Talk to the foreman," he yelled back, then returned to his work. I marched over to the truck where a heavy-set man in his 50s was studying some blueprints spread across the hood. He had a thick mustache and wore a shirt with Desert Plains Construction embroidered on the pocket. "Excuse me, but why are you tearing up my property?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. The foreman looked up, somewhat annoyed at being interrupted. "We're extending Saguaro Ridge Drive per the HOA contract. It's all been approved." "Approved by who? I never gave anyone permission to touch my land." He shuffled through some papers and pulled out a document. "Says here the Saguaro Ridge HOA board authorized the road extension. We're just doing the work we were hired to do." "That's my property you're digging up," I said, pointing at the excavator that was now creating what looked like the foundation for a road extension. "The HOA doesn't own my land. They can't just decide to build on it." The foreman shrugged. "Look, buddy, I don't know about property lines and all that. I just know we got a contract and permits from the HOA. You need to take it up with them. We're going to keep working." I felt my jaw clench. "No, you're going to stop working right now until this gets sorted out." "Can't do that. We got a schedule to keep." He turned back to his blueprints, clearly done with the conversation. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA management office. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I left a heated message explaining the situation and demanding an immediate callback. Then I went inside, threw on some proper clothes, and started looking through all my property documents. I found my survey from when I purchased the house, which clearly showed my property boundaries. The area where they were working was definitely on my land, at least 15 feet past the property line. By noon, the construction crew had made significant progress. They had dug up nearly 200 square feet of my lawn and were laying down gravel base for what was obviously going to be a paved road extension. I had called the HOA office 6 more times, each call going to voicemail. I was furious and felt completely helpless watching strangers destroy my property. Finally, at 2 in the afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Saguaro Ridge HOA. "Mr. Sawyer, this is Brenda Mitchell, the HOA president. I understand you have some concerns about the road extension project. Brenda Mitchell. I had seen her at a few HOA meetings I had attended when I first moved in. She was a woman in her mid-50s with short blonde hair that looked like it had been styled with a ruler, always wearing business casual attire, even for neighborhood gatherings. She had that particular tone of voice that suggested she was used to getting her way and didn't appreciate being questioned. Concerns. Your construction crew is tearing up my property without my permission. That's not a concern. That's trespassing and destruction of property. Mr. Sawyer, the HOA board voted to extend Saguaro Ridge Drive to improve traffic flow in the community. The project was approved by all necessary parties. I'm a necessary party and I didn't approve anything. That's my land you're building on. There was a pause. The HOA has certain rights regarding community improvements. The extension benefits everyone in Saguaro Ridge. I don't care if it benefits everyone. You can't just take my land. I have my property survey right here, and your construction is at least 15 feet onto my property. Mr. Sawyer, I think you're mistaken about where your property line actually is. The HOA used a professional surveying company, and everything we're doing is within the community's right-of-way. Then your surveying company is wrong, or you're lying. Either way, I want that construction stopped immediately. Her voice took on a sharper edge. The construction will continue as scheduled. If you have an issue with the HOA's decision, you can file a formal complaint, but I can assure you that everything has been properly approved. The board isn't going to halt a project that benefits the entire community because one homeowner is confused about property lines. I'm not confused about anything. This is my land, and you have no right to build on it. Have a good day, Mr. Sawyer. She hung up. I stood there staring at my phone, absolutely stunned by the audacity. They were just going to keep destroying my property and act like they had every right to do it. I looked back outside where the construction crew was now bringing in more equipment. They were setting up forms for concrete. This was really happening. I called a property attorney that afternoon. Her name was Rebecca Huang, and she had good reviews online for property disputes. Her office was in downtown Phoenix, about 20 minutes from my house. She agreed to see me the next morning. That night, I barely slept. The construction equipment sat like silent predators on my torn-up lawn, lit by the streetlights. I kept going to the window, looking at the destruction, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. This was my home, my property, and some HOA board thought they could just take it. The next morning, I met with Rebecca Huang in her office. She was a sharp woman in her late 30s, wearing a professional suit and carrying herself with the kind of confidence that made me feel like I had made the right choice. I explained everything that had happened, showed her my property survey, and provided photos I had taken of the construction. She listened carefully, taking notes. "This is pretty straightforward," she said when I finished. "If they're building on your property without your permission, that's a clear case of trespass. The HOA doesn't have the right to take your land for a road extension without going through proper legal channels, which would include compensation and your agreement, or eminent domain, which an HOA doesn't have the power to invoke. So, what do I do? First, I'm going to send a cease and desist letter to the HOA today. That puts them on notice that they're trespassing and gives them an opportunity to stop. If they don't stop, we'll file for a temporary restraining order and then pursue this in court. Do you have title insurance? Yes. Good. You should notify them as well. They might provide legal support since this is a title dispute." She paused, reviewing the photos again. "I have to say, it's incredibly bold of an HOA to do something like this. Usually they try to hide behind some technicality. This is just blatant. The president, Brenda Mitchell, basically told me they're going to keep building regardless of what I say. Rebecca shook her head. That's going to cost them. Not only will they have to remove what they've built, but you can pursue damages for the trespass, the property damage, and potentially punitive damages if we can show they acted with complete disregard for your rights. She prepared the cease and desist letter while I waited, then sent it via email and certified mail to the HOA board. She also filed a formal complaint with the county, since they would have had to pull permits for the construction. If the permits were based on false information about property lines, that was another problem for the HOA. I went home feeling slightly better. At least I had someone fighting for me now. But when I turned onto my street, I saw that the construction crew was back and they were pouring concrete. My stomach dropped. I called Rebecca immediately. They're still working. They're pouring concrete right now. Okay, we're filing for the restraining order today. I'll expedite it. Can you document everything they're doing? For the rest of that day, I took photos and videos of every step of the construction. The workers largely ignored me, though a few gave me sympathetic looks. They were just doing their jobs, I reminded myself. The real problem was the HOA board. By late afternoon, a portion of the road extension was paved. It cut through what used to be my front lawn, a strip of asphalt about 12 feet wide running along the edge of my property. It looked terrible, completely out of place, and it was permanently altering my land. The next day, Rebecca called with good news. We have a hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning for the temporary restraining order. The judge wants to hear from both sides. Make sure you bring all your documentation. That night, I prepared everything. My original property survey, the deed to my house, photos showing the construction before and after, and a timeline of events. I also printed out the HOA's bylaws, which I had never really read carefully before. Nothing in them gave the board the right to take homeowners' land for community projects. The hearing was at the Maricopa County Superior Court downtown. I arrived early, dressed in a suit I had not worn since my divorce proceedings. Rebecca met me outside the courtroom. The HOA has their lawyer here. Just let me do the talking unless the judge asks you a direct question. We entered the courtroom, and I saw Brenda Mitchell sitting with a man in an expensive suit. She looked over at me with an expression that was equal parts annoyance and dismissal. Two other people sat with them, whom I recognized as other HOA board members. The judge, an older man named Judge Raymond Carson, called the case. Rebecca presented our side first, showing the property survey, explaining the timeline of events, and arguing that the HOA was committing ongoing trespass on my property. She showed photos of the construction and the finished road extension. The HOA's lawyer, whose name was Douglas Pritchard, stood up. Your Honor, the Saguaro Ridge HOA board acted in good faith based on a survey they commissioned. The road extension is a necessary improvement for the community, improving safety and traffic flow. Mr. Sawyer is attempting to halt a legitimate community improvement project based on what we believe is an erroneous interpretation of the property lines. Judge Carson looked at the documents in front of him. Mr. Pritchard, do you have the survey your client relied on? We do, Your Honor. He presented a document to the court. The judge studied both surveys, comparing them carefully. After a few minutes, he looked up. These surveys show completely different property lines. Mr. Sawyer's survey, which appears to be from a reputable company and was conducted at the time of his property purchase 3 years ago, clearly shows the construction is on his property. Your survey, Mr. Pritchard, was conducted by whom? A company called Rapid Survey Solutions, Your Honor. And when was this survey conducted? 2 months ago, specifically for this project. Judge Carson frowned. Was the property owner, Mr. Sawyer, notified that his property was being surveyed? Pritchard hesitated. I don't believe he was, Your Honor. So let me understand this. The HOA commissioned a survey without the property owner's knowledge. That survey showed property lines that differ significantly from the official survey conducted at the time of sale. And based on that survey alone, the HOA proceeded to build on what the original survey clearly indicates is private property. Your Honor, the HOA has the right to make improvements to the community. Not on private property, they don't. Not without permission, compensation, and proper legal process. He looked at the photos, and they've already completed a portion of this construction. Yes, Your Honor, Rebecca said. The road extension is paved and finished on my client's property. Judge Carson shook his head. I'm granting the temporary restraining order. All construction is to cease immediately. Furthermore, I'm ordering an independent survey to be conducted by a court-appointed surveyor within the next 2 weeks. Both parties will split the cost. Once we have that survey, we'll reconvene. If it shows what I suspect it will show, the HOA is going to have some serious explaining to do. Brenda Mitchell stood up. Your Honor, this is going to delay a critical community improvement project. Mrs. Mitchell, if your organization built on private property without permission, you should have thought about delays before you started construction. The restraining order is in effect immediately. He banged his gavel. We left the courtroom and I felt a surge of relief. At least the construction would stop. But as Rebecca and I walked to the parking lot, she said, "This is just the beginning. Now we need to prove they were on your property and make them fix what they've done." Over the next 2 weeks, the paved section of road sat on my property like a scar. The HOA put up orange cones around it, but otherwise it just sat there, a constant reminder of the violation. Neighbors started asking me what happened. Most were sympathetic, though a few seemed annoyed that the road project had been halted. One evening, I got a knock on my door. It was my neighbor from 2 houses down, an older man named Frank who had lived in the neighborhood for over a decade. "Vincent, I heard about the trouble with the HOA," he said. "I just wanted you to know that I support what you're doing. Brenda Mitchell and that board have been getting more and more aggressive about pushing projects through without proper input from homeowners. A few years back, they tried to implement some ridiculous landscaping requirements that would have cost everyone thousands of dollars. A bunch of us fought back, and they backed down, but ever since then, Brenda has been trying to consolidate power. I appreciate that, Frank. Honestly, I just want my property back the way it was. You should know that she's been going around telling people you're being selfish and holding up a safety improvement. She's trying to turn the neighborhood against you. That did not surprise me. I'm not being selfish. They're literally building on my land without permission. I know that, and anyone with sense knows that, but Brenda is good at spinning things. Just be prepared for some people to be cold to you." He was right. Over the next week, I noticed some neighbors avoiding eye contact or giving me unfriendly looks. Someone left a note on my car that said, "Stop being selfish. The road helps everyone." It was frustrating and isolating, but I knew I was in the right. The court-appointed surveyor came out and spent an entire day carefully measuring and documenting the property lines. Rebecca and the HOA's lawyer were both present for the survey. The surveyor was a no-nonsense professional who did not engage in conversation beyond what was necessary. When he finished, he said the report would be ready in a few days. When the report came back, it confirmed what my original survey had shown. The road extension was built 15 feet onto my property at its closest point and extended for approximately 40 feet along my property line. The total area of my property that had been paved over was about 210 square feet. The next court date was set for 3 weeks later. This time, it was not just about a restraining order but about what would happen next. Rebecca filed a formal lawsuit against the HOA for trespass, property damage, and requesting that they be ordered to remove the road extension and restore my property. In the meantime, I received a letter from the HOA attempting one last time to resolve things without court. They offered to pay me $5,000 for an easement to keep the road where it was. I showed the letter to Rebecca. "That's insulting," she said. "They destroy your property and then offer you pocket change to legitimize it. Don't even respond. Let's go to court." The trial was set for a Wednesday morning. The courtroom was more crowded this time. Several other homeowners from the neighborhood showed up, some supporting me and others clearly there to support the HOA. Brenda Mitchell arrived with the full HOA board and their lawyer. Judge Carson presided again. This time, it was a full hearing with witness testimony. Rebecca called me to the stand first. She walked me through the entire timeline, from waking up to construction on my property to every attempt I had made to resolve the situation. She showed the court my original survey, the court-appointed survey, and photos documenting the construction and damage. When the HOA's lawyer cross-examined me, he tried to suggest that I was being unreasonable and that the road extension benefited everyone, including me. "Mr. Sawyer, isn't it true that the road extension improves traffic flow and safety in your neighborhood?" "That may be true, but it doesn't give the HOA the right to build on my property without permission." "Did you ever consider that being part of a community means sometimes making small sacrifices for the greater good?" "Sacrificing my property rights is not a small sacrifice. And if the HOA wanted an easement, they should have asked and offered fair compensation before they started building." Rebecca called an expert witness next, a real estate appraiser who testified that the road extension not only damaged my property, but also decreased its value. Having a road cutting through your front lawn was not exactly a selling point. He estimated the diminished value at around $20,000. Then the HOA's lawyer called Brenda Mitchell to the stand. Rebecca was ready. "Mrs. Mitchell, when did the HOA board vote to approve this road extension project?" "6 months ago," Brenda said confidently. "We had a properly noticed board meeting, and the vote was unanimous." "And did you notify Mr. Sawyer about this project?" "We sent notice to all homeowners about the road improvement project." "But did you specifically notify him that the project would involve building on his property?" Brenda hesitated. "We notified all homeowners about the project. That's not what I asked. Did you notify Mr. Sawyer that you would be building on his private property?" "The survey we had showed it was within the community right-of-way." "Did you share that survey with Mr. Sawyer before you started construction?" "No." "Did you ask Mr. Sawyer's permission before you started building on what you thought was the community right-of-way but was actually his private property?" "We didn't believe we needed his permission." Even though previous HOA projects had involved getting permission from affected homeowners, Brenda's face flushed. This was different. This was a critical safety improvement. Rebecca pulled out documents. "Mrs. Mitchell, I have minutes from HOA board meetings over the past 5 years. In 3 separate instances, when projects involved work near property lines, the board specifically reached out to affected homeowners first. Why didn't you do that this time?" "I don't recall those specific instances. Let me refresh your memory." Rebecca read from the minutes, detailing 3 separate projects where the board had been careful to get homeowner approval. "So why was Mr. Sawyer's property treated differently?" Brenda had no good answer. She stammered something about the project timeline and the importance of the work, but it was clear she had no legitimate justification. "Rebecca, then presented evidence that made my blood run cold. She had subpoenaed records from Rapid Survey Solutions, the company the HOA had hired to do their survey. It turned out that Brenda Mitchell had specifically instructed them to show the property lines in a way that would allow the road extension to proceed. There were emails where she pushed back on their initial survey results and asked them to reconsider the measurements. Mrs. Mitchell, did you instruct Rapid Survey Solutions to alter their survey results? I asked them to double-check their work. You asked them to double-check their work, or you asked them to change the results to show what you wanted. I wanted accurate results. Accurate results, or results that would let you build where you wanted to build. Rebecca showed the court the email chain. In one email, Brenda had written, "We need the property line to be here for the project to work. Please review your measurements again." The judge's expression grew stern as he reviewed the emails. "Mrs. Mitchell, did you knowingly use a questionable survey to justify building on private property?" Brenda looked flustered. "I believed we were acting within the HOA's rights. That's not what I asked. Did you know, or should you have known, that Mr. Sawyer's original survey showed different property lines? I was aware there was a previous survey. And you proceeded anyway, using a survey that you had specifically pushed a company to alter. Your Honor, I was trying to do what was best for the community." Judge Carson was not having it. "Mrs. Mitchell, what's best for the community is following the law and respecting property rights. Based on the evidence presented here, it's clear that the HOA knowingly trespassed on Mr. Sawyer's property, built a road extension without his permission, and attempted to legitimize it with a survey that was, at best, questionable and, at worst, fraudulent. He ruled in my favor on all counts. The HOA was ordered to remove the road extension entirely and restore my property to its original condition, including replacing all damaged grass and landscaping. They were also ordered to pay for the independent survey, all my attorney fees, and $15,000 in damages for the trespass and property value diminishment. Furthermore, Judge Carson said, I'm referring this matter to the county attorney's office to investigate whether any criminal fraud occurred in the procurement of the Rapid Survey Solutions survey. Mrs. Mitchell, you may want to consult with a criminal attorney." The courtroom was silent. Brenda looked like she had been slapped. The other board members looked shocked and angry, not at me, but seemingly at Brenda for getting them into this mess. We left the courthouse, and Rebecca shook my hand. That went about as well as it possibly could have. The judge's ruling was comprehensive, and the criminal referral was the cherry on top. You think she'll actually face criminal charges? It's possible. If they can prove she knowingly used a fraudulent survey, that's fraud. But even if criminal charges don't materialize, she's done as HOA president. The board would be insane to keep her after this. Over the next month, the HOA hired a different construction company to remove the road extension. It was surreal watching them tear up the same pavement that had caused so much trouble. They removed all the asphalt and concrete, excavated the gravel base, and then brought in topsoil to level everything. The HOA also hired a landscaping company to restore my lawn. Since it was Arizona, that meant not just grass, but also some desert landscaping with native plants. The landscapers were professional and did quality work. They matched the existing landscaping as closely as possible and even improved some areas that had been struggling. During this time, I learned that Brenda Mitchell had been forced to resign from the HOA board. 3 other board members resigned as well, saying they had not known the full extent of what Brenda had done and did not want to be associated with the fiasco. New board elections were held, and several homeowners who had previously stayed out of HOA politics stepped up to run. Frank, my neighbor, was elected as the new president. The county attorney's office did pursue charges against Brenda. She was charged with fraud and misconduct, specifically for knowingly using false information to justify the construction. The case took months to wind through the system, but eventually she pled guilty to a reduced charge of misconduct. She was given probation, community service, and a fine. It was not prison time, but it was enough to send a message. The owner of Rapid Survey Solutions also faced consequences. Their business license was suspended for 6 months, and they were fined for providing a fraudulent survey. They tried to claim they had just made an honest mistake, but the email evidence was damning. As my lawn was being restored, neighbors started coming by to apologize. Many said they had not understood the full situation and had just believed Brenda's version of events. A few admitted they had been uncomfortable with how aggressive the HOA board had become, but had not wanted to speak up. One evening, I was watering my newly restored lawn when a woman from down the street approached me. Her name was Janet Peters, and I had seen her at a few neighborhood gatherings but did not know her well. "Vincent, I owe you an apology," she said. "I was one of the people who thought you were being unreasonable. Brenda told us that you were holding up a safety project over a technicality. I didn't realize she was literally building on your land without permission. What she did was completely wrong, and I'm sorry I didn't give you the benefit of the doubt." "I appreciate that, Janet. Honestly, I understand why people believed her. She's been in charge for years and seemed to know what she was doing. That's the problem. We all just trusted her without questioning. This whole thing has been a wake-up call for a lot of us. Frank is already implementing changes to make sure something like this can't happen again. Any project that involves property lines now has to be approved by a majority of homeowners, not just the board. That sounds like a good change." The lawn restoration was completed in late November, about 6 months after the whole ordeal started. The landscapers had done an excellent job. You could barely tell that there had been a road cutting through my property. The grass was green and healthy. The desert plants looked natural and well-placed, and my front yard looked better than it had before the construction. The HOA issued a formal written apology, signed by all the new board members. It acknowledged that the previous board had violated my property rights, apologized for the stress and inconvenience, and pledged to operate with more transparency and accountability going forward. It was a nice gesture, though it did not undo the months of frustration. I also received a check from the HOA for the full amount the judge had awarded, $15,000 plus all my attorney fees, which had added up to about $12,000. And they had paid for all the restoration work, which I later learned cost them nearly $30,000. In total, the road extension fiasco cost the HOA close to $60,000, not counting the fines and legal fees they paid to their own lawyer. Some people in the neighborhood grumbled about the cost, saying it came out of everyone's dues. But Frank, as the new president, was quick to point out that it was the previous board's reckless actions that had caused the expense, not my defense of my property rights. Around the holidays, the neighborhood had a community gathering at the local park. It was the first one I attended since the whole situation had started. I was nervous about going, unsure how people would treat me, but I decided I needed to stop hiding. To my surprise, most people were friendly. Several came up to thank me for standing up to the HOA board and holding them accountable. A few said they had their own issues with Brenda over the years, but had never pushed back because it seemed like too much trouble. Frank gave a short speech at the gathering, talking about the new direction of the HOA. "We're going back to basics," he said. "The HOA exists to maintain common areas and enforce reasonable rules that protect property values. We're not here to build empires or push personal agendas. And we're certainly not here to violate anyone's property rights. The previous board forgot that, and it cost us all, but we're going to do better." There was applause, and I felt a sense of relief. My neighborhood felt like a community again, not a battleground. In January, about 9 months after the construction equipment first appeared on my lawn, I received a letter from Rebecca Huang. It was a formal notice that the case was completely closed. All judgments had been satisfied. All restoration work had been completed to code and specification, and there were no remaining legal issues. Attached was a final bill, showing that the HOA had paid every penny owed. I sat in my kitchen, the same spot where I had first seen the excavator tearing up my lawn, and looked out at my restored property. It had been a long, stressful fight, but I had won. More importantly, I had established that property rights mattered, even against an organization that was supposed to serve the community. That weekend, I invited a few neighbors over for a barbecue. Frank came, along with Janet and her husband, and a few other people from the street. We stood on my back patio, enjoying the mild Arizona winter weather, and someone made a joke about my front yard being the most expensive piece of land in the neighborhood. "You know," Frank said, "this whole situation actually made the HOA better. We've had more homeowners involved in meetings, more transparency, and more accountability. Sometimes it takes a crisis to fix a broken system." "I would have preferred not to be the crisis," I said with a laugh. "Fair enough. But you did the right thing, Vincent. A lot of people would have just accepted it or been too intimidated to fight back. You stood your ground, literally, and everyone in this neighborhood is better off for it." As the sun set over the desert mountains and my neighbors laughed and talked on my patio, I realized he was right. It had been worth it, not just for me, but for the principle that your home is your castle, and no one, not even an HOA, has the right to take it from you without your permission. The following months passed quietly. The new HOA board operated efficiently and transparently. They sent out detailed minutes from every meeting, solicited input on major decisions, and generally acted like a competent, professional organization. It was what the HOA should have been all along. I settled back into my routine. I worked from home as a software developer, which had made dealing with the lawsuit easier since I had a flexible schedule. My lawn continued to thrive, and I took pride in maintaining it. Every time I looked at the front yard, I remembered what had happened, but now it was a reminder of standing up for myself rather than a source of anger. In March, about a year after the original incident, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Douglas Pritchard, the lawyer who had represented the HOA during the lawsuit. He was alone, wearing casual clothes instead of a suit. "Mr. Sawyer, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to speak with you off the record." I was surprised but invited him in. We sat in my living room and he looked uncomfortable. "I wanted to apologize," he said. "During the lawsuit, I was just doing my job representing my client, but the more I learned about what Brenda Mitchell had done, the more disgusted I became. I've represented HOAs for 15 years, and I've never seen such a blatant disregard for a homeowner's rights. I should have advised the board to settle immediately, but Brenda was insistent on fighting. I appreciate you saying that. It was a difficult situation. I also wanted you to know that I've since stopped representing that HOA. I couldn't continue working with them knowing what had happened. Frank reached out when they needed legal help with some other matter, and I referred him to a colleague. I just couldn't in good conscience continue the relationship. That's decent of you. It's the least I could do. What happened to you was wrong, and I was part of it, even if I was just doing my job as an attorney. I'm glad the judge ruled the way he did, and that your property has been restored." He stood up. "Anyway, I just wanted you to know that. Take care, Mr. Sawyer." After he left, I sat thinking about how many lives had been affected by Brenda's actions. Not just mine, but the other board members who resigned, the HOA's reputation, Pritchard's conscience, and the entire neighborhood's dynamics. It was a reminder of how much damage one person with a little power could do when they stopped being accountable to others. Spring in Arizona was beautiful. The desert plants bloomed and my yard looked spectacular. I spent weekends working on various home improvement projects, enjoying my space and my autonomy. The HOA left me alone, which was exactly how I wanted it. In May, I ran into Brenda Mitchell at a grocery store. It was the first time I had seen her since the trial. She looked older, tired. We made eye contact, and for a moment I thought she might say something. Instead, she turned and walked quickly in the other direction. Part of me felt a small sense of pity, but mostly I just felt relieved that chapter was truly over. That summer, the new HOA board organized a neighborhood cleanup day and a community barbecue. They were trying to rebuild the sense of community that had been damaged during the previous administration. I volunteered to help with the cleanup, spending a Saturday morning picking up litter and trimming common area landscaping with about 20 other residents. During the barbecue afterward, Frank announced that the HOA had been recognized by the county for implementing best practices in governance and transparency. It was a small award, but it represented how far things had come. "None of this would have happened without Vincent showing us that accountability matters," Frank said, gesturing toward me. "When someone in power oversteps, it takes courage to push back. Vincent did that, and we're all benefiting from it now." People clapped, and I felt a mix of embarrassment and pride. I had not set out to be any kind of hero or reformer. I had just wanted my property to be left alone. But sometimes standing up for yourself has broader consequences. As summer turned to fall, I started dating someone I had met through a friend. Her name was Jessica Patterson, and she was a teacher at a local elementary school. When I told her the story of the HOA debacle, she was amazed. "I've heard HOA horror stories, but that's next level. They literally just built on your land." "Yep, and they thought they could get away with it." "What made you decide to fight instead of just accepting it?" I thought about that. I guess I realized that if I let them get away with it, it would set a precedent. Not just for me, but for everyone else. If the HOA could take my land without permission, they could do it to anyone. Someone had to say no. That's brave. A lot of people would have just felt overwhelmed and given up. I was overwhelmed. There were days I wanted to give up. But every time I looked at that road cutting through my lawn, I got angry all over again, and that anger kept me going. By the end of the year, life had returned to a comfortable normal. I had a healthy relationship, a restored property, a functional HOA, and peace of mind. The whole experience had taught me several important lessons. First, property rights matter and are worth defending. Second, organizations are only as good as the people running them, and accountability is essential. Third, sometimes you have to stand up for yourself even when it is difficult and everyone is telling you to back down. The legal judgment had also set a precedent in the county. Rebecca told me that several other attorneys had cited the case when dealing with HOA overreach situations. It became a cautionary tale used in HOA management, training about the importance of respecting property rights and following proper procedures. One evening in December, Almost 2 years after the whole ordeal began, I was sitting on my back patio watching the sunset. Jessica was inside making dinner, and I could hear her humming to herself. My lawn looked perfect, the neighborhood was peaceful, and I felt truly content for the first time in years. Frank came walking over from his house with a bottle of wine. "Thought you might want this," he said. "It's the 2-year anniversary of when you first called me about what the HOA had done. Figured it was worth commemorating." I laughed. "Has it really been 2 years? Almost exactly. Time flies." He sat down in one of my patio chairs. "You know, I was talking to some of the board members the other day, and we all agreed that what happened to you was the worst thing that could have happened to this neighborhood." "How do you figure?" It exposed how broken things were and gave us a chance to fix them. If Brenda had kept going with smaller abuses of power, things would have gradually gotten worse until the whole community was dysfunctional. Your situation was so egregious that it forced a reckoning. Now we have a functional, transparent HOA that actually serves the homeowners. Would that have happened otherwise? Probably not. I guess that's one way to look at it, though I still wish I had not had to go through it, of course. But since you did, I'm glad it worked out the way it did. He raised his glass. "To property rights and standing your ground." "I'll drink to that." Jessica came out with plates of food, and the three of us had dinner on the patio, talking about everything except HOAs and property disputes. It was a perfect evening, made all the better by knowing that I was sitting on land that was unquestionably mine, in a home where I was secure, in a community that had learned from its mistakes. Looking back on everything that had happened, I sometimes wondered what would have occurred if I had not fought back. The road would still be cutting through my property. Brenda Mitchell would likely still be HOA president, finding new ways to overstep her authority. Other homeowners might have faced similar violations. The neighborhood would be a worse place. Instead, by standing up for my rights, I had not only protected my property, but had also sparked a positive change throughout the entire community. It had been expensive, stressful, and time-consuming, but absolutely worth it. The legal system had worked the way it was supposed to. Judge Carson had seen through the HOA's justifications and held them accountable. Rebecca had been an excellent advocate who understood both the legal issues and the principle at stake. The county attorney had pursued appropriate charges, and the new HOA board had learned from the mistakes of their predecessors. As the holidays approached, I received one final piece of correspondence related to the case. It was a formal notice from the Arizona Corporation Commission that Rapid Survey Solutions had permanently lost its license to operate in the state. The investigation had revealed that they had falsified multiple surveys over the years, not just mine. Several lawsuits were pending against them from other property owners who had been harmed by their fraudulent work. I showed the letter to Rebecca, who I still occasionally met for coffee. "That's the last domino falling," she said. "Everyone involved in what happened to you has now faced appropriate consequences. Brenda has a criminal record, the board members resigned in disgrace, the construction company lost a client, the surveying company is out of business, and the HOA paid a heavy financial price. Meanwhile, you got your property back, damages, and your legal fees covered. That's about as complete a victory as you can get in a property dispute. It does feel like justice was served. Because it was. The system worked. That doesn't always happen, so when it does, it's worth acknowledging. That Christmas, the neighborhood was festive and friendly. Houses were decorated, people were cheerful, and there was a sense of community cohesion that had been missing when I first moved in. The new HOA organized a holiday lights contest and a food drive, focusing on bringing people together rather than exerting control. I decorated my house modestly, putting up some lights and a wreath on the door. My front lawn, now fully recovered and matured, looked beautiful even in winter. The grass was slightly dormant but healthy, and the desert plants added color and texture. You would never know that 2 years earlier, an asphalt road had been carved through it. On Christmas Eve, I hosted a small gathering at my house. Jessica's family came over, along with Frank and his wife, and Janet and her husband. We exchanged gifts, ate too much food, and enjoyed each other's company. At one point, Frank proposed a toast to Vincent for reminding all of us that principles matter and that standing up for what's right is always worth it, even when it's difficult. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt genuinely moved. What had started as a nightmare had ultimately led to positive changes and meaningful connections with my neighbors. As the evening wound down and guests started leaving, Jessica and I stood in the doorway watching the neighborhood lights twinkle in the darkness. "You've got a good community here," she said. "Yeah, I do. It took some work to get here, but it was worth it." That's true of most good things in life. I pulled her close, looking out at my property, my home, my neighborhood. Everything was exactly as it should be. The road that had been illegally built on my land was gone, replaced by grass and plants. The HOA that had overstepped its authority had been reformed and was now functioning properly. The people responsible had faced consequences, and I had learned that sometimes you have to fight for what's yours, even when it seems like the entire system is against you. The story could have ended differently. I could have been intimidated into accepting the HOA's easement offer. I could have run out of money for legal fees. The judge could have ruled in the HOA's favor. But none of those things happened because I had right on my side, a good lawyer, and the determination to see things through. In the months and years that followed, life continued peacefully. Jessica and I eventually got engaged and started planning a wedding. The HOA remained well run under Frank's leadership, and eventually transitioned to new leadership that maintained the same standards of transparency and accountability. The neighborhood thrived, with property values increasing and new families moving in. I never forgot what happened, but it no longer defined my relationship with the neighborhood. It was just a chapter in my life, an important one, but not the whole story. When new neighbors moved in, sometimes people would tell them about the incident as a cautionary tale or a source of neighborhood lore. I became known as the guy who had stood up to the HOA and won, which was fine with me if it meant future boards would think twice before overstepping their authority. Years later, when Jessica and I were planning to possibly move to a bigger house to start a family, one of the things we discussed was whether to stay in an HOA neighborhood. The experience had not completely soured me on HOAs. I recognized that a well-run HOA could be beneficial, maintaining property values in common areas. But I was also much more cautious and informed. I knew what questions to ask, what red flags to look for, and what rights I had as a homeowner. We ultimately decided to stay in the Saguaro Ridge community. The HOA was well managed, the neighbors were great, and I had worked hard to restore my property after what happened. It was home. Plus, leaving would have felt like letting Brenda Mitchell win in some small way, and I was not about to do that. My property, the half-acre at 4782 Saguaro Ridge Drive, remained untouched by any further HOA projects. The board was scrupulous about respecting property lines and getting homeowner permission for anything that even came close to private property. The reforms that had been implemented after my lawsuit created a system of checks and balances that prevented any one person from wielding too much power. In the end, what happened to me became a positive force for change. One person's willingness to stand up against injustice had rippled outward, affecting an entire community for the better. It was not the way I would have chosen to make an impact, but I was proud of the result nonetheless. As I sat on my patio on a warm Arizona evening, watching the sun set behind the mountains, I thought about how far things had come. From that shocking morning when I saw construction equipment on my lawn, to the long legal battle, to the complete restoration and reform, it had been quite a journey. But I had come out the other side stronger, more connected to my community, and secure in the knowledge that my property rights were protected. The road that the HOA had illegally extended onto my land was gone, removed at their expense as ordered by the court. My lawn had been fully restored and looked better than ever. The people responsible had faced appropriate consequences, and the HOA had been reformed into an organization that actually served its members rather than trampling their rights. It was a complete victory, the kind that rarely happens in disputes like this. And every time I looked at my front yard, I was reminded that sometimes the system works, justice prevails, and standing up for yourself is absolutely worth it. The grass that now grew where asphalt had temporarily been was not just grass. It was a symbol of property rights defended, justice served, and a community made better through accountability. That was the end of my battle with the Saguaro Ridge HOA, and the beginning of a better chapter for everyone involved.